Alexander Nevsky used to be the king of cavalry. He was the one commander for Cavs that even if you were making a new march or making your first Cav march, you would get him if you didn't have him because he was just so good. But with the addition of Hao Bing to the game, is this really still the case? Is Alexander Nevsky still that king where even if you're making your first ever Cav march, you should go for him over Hao Bing? Or maybe if you're making your second Cav march and you don't have Nevsky, is he worth it over Hao Bing? And today, I'll be answering that question. I'll go over the strengths and weaknesses of both commanders. I'll discuss which commanders pair really well with which commanders. And finally, I'll tell you which commander is going to be best for your account based on a few different factors. So if you are interested in how Nevsky or Hao Bing are going to perform for you, and if they're a good investment for you, you want to check out the rest of the video. Let's start off with the advantages of Alexander Nevsky. And the first thing is his really amazing debuff. Up to a 45% defense reduction, which is a lot more than Zhang Yu, for example, who only has a 30% reduction. So that is one thing people have said about Nevsky a lot in my comments when I said that he's a little bit worse than Hao Bing. It is that his debuff is extremely good. The next thing I really like about Nevsky is his March speed is a permanent all-round thing. Unlike Hao Bing, where his March speed you have to be off Alliance territory, Nevsky's March speed, if you're on Alliance territory, if you're inside a building, it doesn't matter, you're going to have increased March speed. So I really like that about Nevsky. And I also like how he takes a damage reduction here. And also he's a fairly tanky commander overall. He has a nice health bonus when off territory. He has 20% defense. And on his expertise has a chance to gain 30% health. So overall, Nevsky is an extremely tanky commander. And especially the damage reduction I really like. Because if you take active skills quite often, and you're going to take active skills always, and you're surrounding whoever's hitting you with at least 2 marches, you're going to take 5% reduced damage. You know what that means for you? If you get hit by 10 active skills, you've basically reduced your damage by a grand total of 50 possible percentages over those 10 turns. So I really like how he's taking the damage reduction, and it is probably one of the more underrated things in his kit since we don't see all damage reductions very often. The final thing I really like about Nevsky is he's got a lot of skill damage. For a commander who's meant to be a real tanky primary and just like a fast, just a good buffing primary, he's actually got a lot of DPS to his name. The increase in skill damage of up to 60% is amazing. One thing to note though, it is only 25% for the primary active skill caster, and then the secondary commander will benefit from that 35%. So he will deal 25% skill damage for the primary. So let's say you're running a Nevsky with a Joan. Nevsky will do 25% skill damage, and then the next turn, Joan of Arc will deal that 60% increase because she will get the triggered skill damage bonus, which is a really nice part of his kit. Now let's discuss the advantages of Hao Bing. The first thing is he has 400 more damage factor than any other commander in the whole entire game besides like Sargon. His damage factor is crazy for a single target commander, and it is way higher than Nevsky's. 400 more damage factor. While that may not sound like a lot, it is a lot. He also has a very good March speed reduction, and while it is like taken over by Saladins and also Williams and Boudikas and Richards, I know it's a lot of commanders, he's a fairly fast Cav commander if you're outside of Alliance territory, so he does allow you to chase people down a lot quicker than if you were running a Saladin, slow them down and just decimate them as a nuke. Another thing to note is that he has a reduced rage requirement for his active skill on his third skill. As long as he hasn't been garrisoned in the last 30 seconds, he's able to reduce the rage requirement of his active skill by 150, which is crazy good. And then on top of this, he's dealing more skill damage than Nevsky. You might be thinking, how is this possible? At maximum, he can only deal 55% more skill damage. Nevsky has 60. Well, his skill damage applies to both the primary and the secondary commander, which is amazing. So you can run Hao Bing with a primary, and he's not going to have like half the skill damage. He's going to have that full 55% possible skill damage on his active skills, which is crazy good. You're just going to absolutely nuke whoever you're hitting in the first like skill cycle. So I really like that. I also like his healing. I've never thought I'd ever say that, but his healing is after you defeat someone. So what happens is you defeat an enemy troop, you heal 1,500 damage factor, and the next fight you engage in, you're going to have more troops than what you would have had if you didn't have that healing. Then the final thing I really like about Hao Bing is his expertise, which gives him a lot of value. He gets a grand total of 10% more stats. That might not sound like a lot, but it is 5% defense and 5% skill damage. He then gets the autumn win effect, which allows him whenever he defeats a troop to reset his rage, reset all temporary buffs, and also reset all debuffs he has. And while that sounds like a bad thing, why would you reset your rage and buffs? The good thing is, it allows him to reactivate that third skill, bringing him back the shorter rage requirement and the skill damage bonus. I also like how it doubles his healing effect as well, so he's got a very valuable expertise. Now let's discuss the disadvantages to Nevsky, and first of all, his debuff, you really have to be surrounded to fully benefit from it. For Nevsky's debuff to be a good thing, you want to at least be 2x surrounded for it to be on par with Zhang Yu, and 3x surrounded for it to be pretty much the best defense debuff in the game. So keep that in mind, his debuff is not that good if he's not being hit. if you were attacking someone one-on-one with just a Nevsky and they're not hitting you with like more than one march, he is not benefiting nearly as much. I'd also like to mention that Nevsky's expertise is not that good. Compared to Hao Bing's expertise, where if you get all 4 of Hao Bing's skills, and then you get the buffs on his expertise, it's really strong. Nevsky's expertise, you get 5% normal attack, and then 30%, a chance to gain 30% health. It isn't that amazing. Like, overall, compared to Hao Bing, who also has 4 extremely good field-relevant skills, his expertise is very lackluster compared to that. Basically, it is 690 gold heads for way less than Hao Bing is going to give you for 690 gold heads, because all 4 of their skills are both really good and field relevant, just Nevsky's expertise is not nearly as good. Then another thing I don't really like about Nevsky's kit is how he doesn't get the skill damage bonus for both the primary and the secondary. He is only going to give it to that secondary commander, so in some situations, it's better to run him secondary, but you also want him as the primary, so he's the tank. It can be a little bit confusing trying to decide where you'd want to put your Nevsky, and having it only trigger for the secondary commander can be difficult, especially if you want to run Nevsky as a primary, but you also want him to benefit from the skill damage, but then also you could run a commander like Joan as the secondary, and then it becomes really good. But in some situations, that skill damage is a bit of a downside. And then the final thing that's a downside is how his health is an outside of Alliance territory only thing, so that can be a little bit of a downer, but it works in Ark of Osiris, it works in Sunset Canyon, and obviously whenever you're outside of Alliance territory, it is also going to be right there, ready to give you a bunch more kills. Now, what downsides does Hao Bing have? Well, first of all, like I said before, his march speed reduction is shared by a lot of commanders. For example, Saladin, William, you also got Boudica Prime, Richard, all these commanders have a march speed reduction on their active skill at the same potency, if not more, than Hao Bing. So, that means his march speed reduction is going to be sometimes cancelled early, sometimes it won't even trigger, so it's a bit annoying if you run a Boudica Prime, especially because she's already got the march speed reduction, that he does have that in his kit, and sometimes it's nice to chase down people and drop it into them, but then there's also chances that, like, you're gonna throw the active skill, the march speed reduction is gonna give you like an extra second, instead of the possible 3 seconds it could have been giving you. Also, while we're on the active skill, you will notice that if he's the secondary commander, his damage factor is halved, so he's a primary only commander, and in some situations that can be pretty bad, especially for example if you have a Zhang Yu, you're not gonna put him with your Hao Bing, because Hao Bing has to be the primary, like there is no way around that, and if he's the secondary, you are losing half your damage factor. I also would like to mention his march speed is an off-alliance territory thing, and like I said with Nevsky, that is not a very good thing, but it is something you can live with. And then the main disadvantage he has here is he can't city pop at all. If you're city popping in Hao Bing, you're missing out on the 30% extra skill damage, and your active skills will cost the 150 extra rage, keeping the rage requirement at 1000. The reason that is because he can't be garrisoned in a building for 30 seconds before the buff to trigger, so that means if he's in your city and you hop out, if you're going to actually try and pop someone properly, it's not going to work. If you do it from a flag, it's not going to work. So he is not going to be a good commander if you want to do city popping, and that is a very, very good way to get kills, but he's not going to work as effective in those situations. The final disadvantage is how the Autumn Wind effect actually removes your rage. It resets him pretty much, takes him out of combat. And the issue with this is it can be extremely difficult to rage chain to different targets if your Hao Bing basically defeats someone who's low. Like maybe you hit someone, they start running, and someone else hits them and then they die. You're going to reset your rage in that situation without getting any extra kills. So this can actually be a bad thing if you go all the way on the expertise room, but it is sometimes better for you, especially if you're doing murder ball versus murder ball, where if you're running Hao Bing and you don't want him to leave combat, or you can't leave combat, his expertise is still going to be really good. So overall with Nevsky, he does everything extremely well. There's nothing he truly excels in where I'm like, wow, he's amazing. But there's nothing that he's really bad in where I'm like, wow, Nevsky's missing this in his kit. His disadvantages are very, very small. There's nothing that's a standout weakness in Nevsky's kit. Hao Bing, however, does some things crazy well. Like the amount of damage he's gonna deal is crazy. His rage cycle is amazing. His skill damage is amazing. His DPS is just really good. But other than that, he's not tanky, he's missing some march speed in some situations, and some parts of his kit could actually be a disadvantage in certain scenarios. So, he is really, really good in some situations, like he'll completely decimate, but in other situations, he won't do nearly as well as Nevsky. So overall, Nevsky's disadvantages and advantages make him a more all-round commander. Hao Bing's make him an extreme DPS commander, only DPS, nothing else. Now, which commanders work well with Nevsky? And there are really two standouts here. First of all, you got Zhang Yu. Zhang Yu has to be the primary to fully benefit from his reduced rage cost. And obviously, you can't do that with Hao Bing, because Hao Bing has to be the primary. And if you put Hao Bing with Zhang Yu as a secondary, there's really no point. Like, what's the point at that point? I guess that rhymes. Zhang Yu is just not going to benefit nearly as much if he was the secondary than if he were the primary to a Nevsky. So if you got a Zhang Yu, Nevsky is probably going to be better for you. Then also William is really good with Nevsky because William's already a fairly squishy commander. He doesn't have too many defensive stats. He does a lot of damage. He does have this 20% defense, but overall it's not that much. So William definitely is way better with Nevsky as a tanking commander because Nevsky can take a few hits and deal a few hits back, and then you can hide the William behind the Nevsky. One last honorable mention is gotta be Attila. Attila is a commander that, for example, if you put him behind a Nevsky or in front of a Nevsky, you're going to know that if you take a couple hits, you're going to be fine. And since Attila likes getting hit every now and again, you're going to get some nice normal attack and counter attack bonuses. The issue is though, if you put him with Hao Bing, yeah, is going to perform okay with Attila with the quicker rage cycle. Issue is, Attila's just going to die too quickly to really ramp up and deal the increased damage. Thing with William as well, if you put him with Hao Bing, it's just too squishy, and if someone hits a Hao Bing, which I feel like will happen since he is similar to XY, you're going to notice your William and Hao Bing is just going to get absolutely decimated, especially if he gets swarmed down. Now, what commanders work really well with Hao Bing? And the first one has to be Joan Prime, and she is one of, if not the most important Cav commanders in this situation, since she's the best secondary. She works amazing with Nevsky, she just works better with Hao Bing. Over the reports I have seen from the ROK tester, she works around 3,000 to 5,000 sevs better with Hao Bing than she does with Nevsky, and that's a fairly substantial difference. That's like a 50,000 power difference in a report. So overall, the main commander out of every single Cav commander, Joan of Arc Prime, the best secondary, works best with Hao Bing. Also, Saladin works better with Hao Bing because he is way more tanky, and there's no point putting two tanky commanders, for example a Nevsky plus a Saladin, when you could run a Hao Bing who's very glass cannon but high DPS, with Saladin who is a way more tanky commander. He's got skill damage taken reductions, counter attack taken reduction, plus he's got a march speed reduction as well, so you can kind of stack the march speed reduction. I know that can be bad, but in some situations it is really good, and especially if you run him as a secondary. Hao Bing throws his march speed reduction, it lasts 2 seconds. Then Saladin gets his march speed reduction, which lasts 5 seconds. You're only really losing a second of march speed reduction there, so 1 turn. So Saladin, I think, works really well with Hao Bing, especially compared to Nevsky. One last commander I'd like to mention is Minamoto, who works pretty equally with both Nevsky and Hao Bing. I mean, he's gonna work fine with Hao Bing, he's got some march speed behind him, he's got defense, and he's got a high attack increase on his relic, so he'll be fine with Hao Bing. Hao Bing's gonna allow him to throw that active skill more often, so you're gonna get more single target DPS out of Minamoto, but he also still works extremely well with Nevsky, and we know that, and we've seen it happen on the open field. So Minamoto is, I think, fairly equal between both the commanders. That's why I didn't put him with either one of them. Now, which players should go for a Nevsky over a Hao Bing? Well, first of all, if you already have a Nevsky, I don't think a Hao Bing is a big enough improvement to say you go and get him, especially if you're running a Nevsky and a Joan. If you're already running that combination, Hao Bing probably out of the question for you unless you're considering 2 Cav marches. If you're looking to make a first ever Cav march and you want to get a William from a daily special offer, Nevsky is going to be overall a little bit better than Hao Bing. I think that Nevsky is going to be more tanky, he's going to bring a lot of skill damage still, and I like that Nevsky's march speed is going to be a permanent thing, because if you get in a sticky situation with your William, you know that if he gets swarmed, he's going to get destroyed. So with Nevsky's march speed, you can get out of those situations way easier than with Hao Bing's march speed, which is only outside of Alliance territory. So if you have a William, he's much better with Nevsky, and Nevsky just is 100% you gotta go get him over Hao Bing. Same thing can be said with Zhang Yu. Because Zhang Yu has to be the primary, you've pretty much gotta get that Nevsky, because Nevsky can be a secondary commander. Hao Bing just can't be. So if you want to get Zhang Yu, or you already have Zhang Yu, then Nevsky is the better option out of Nevsky or Hao Bing. Also, for rallying, Nevsky is a better option than Hao Bing. We've seen that since Hao Bing can leave the structure and it only takes like 10 seconds to hit a flag and stuff like that, it can be a little bit complicated to rally with him. So he overall performs worse than Nevsky with Justinian, and he's just not even close to the power in a rally that Nevsky brings, because if he gets swarmed, he's dealing debuff. So Nevsky is also a better rally if you are considering being a mixed field and rally leader. And also, if you're looking for a more tanky commander, maybe you find that you get swarmed a lot, maybe you're in Imperium KVKs where all you're doing is getting swarmed and trying to deal as much damage as you can, Nevsky is probably going to be the better option. Now, who should get Hao Bing? Well, first of all, if you have a Joan of Arc and you don't have a Nevsky for whatever reason, Hao Bing is just better. The trades show that she is better with Hao Bing. Also, if you have a Saladin, it's going to be way better to get Hao Bing. So this does mean, I think a lot of first-time Season 3 players making their first ever Cav march should just get Hao Bing. Yes, he's missing the Nevsky defense debuff, but I think that Hao Bing overall is a better investment because he is bringing a lot more DPS than Nevsky, and he's still bringing a nice march speed reduction. And if you put him with Saladin as the secondary, he's going to be decently tanky, where you know that if you do get hit a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. If you put him with Joan, it's not really as tanky, but Joan's damage just makes up for it. And the fact that she can throw her double skill pretty much on her 10th turn if you get the increased rage cycle from Hao Bing means that Joan of Arc is going to be a really good commander to run with him. Since I think Zhang Yu's active skill throws every 6 turns, Hao Bing should be exactly the same. And that means you can get a Joan of Arc proc pretty much with only 2 turns wasted. Where, for example, if you run it with Nevsky, there's around 3 to 5 turns wasted. So I do much prefer the Joan with the Hao Bing, which is why I'd say that he's the better investment if you're making your first ever Cav March, since Joan is definitely the best cavalry secondary. But then, like I said, a lot of first-time Season 3 players have Saladin, and he can be a really good option with Hao Bing. Just keep in mind, he may not be worth it for you because there is an option to go and get a Joan of Arc just like a few weeks later after Saladin releases, so do keep that in mind if you are going to invest in him. If you have Minamoto, it's up to you. If you find that you want a tanky commander, you just go Nevsky, and if you find that you want to just get the more DPS and hope it goes well, then you go Hao Bing. Now, obviously, in a 20-minute video, I can't shove everything together to make the final verdict about Hao Bing and Nevsky for every single account in the game. So, if I did miss anything about your account, maybe your account's a little bit different, maybe you have a Bertrand and you want to know who is going to work better with, let me know the commanders you want to run, let me know your current murder ball, and stuff like that in the comments, and I'll tell you which commander I think is going to be better for you, Nevsky or Hao Bing. So if I did miss anything about your account, let me know what it was, and I'll let you know if Nevsky or Hao Bing is going to be the better cavalry investment for you. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.